Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Company of Heroes developer live stream for January. Welcome back. It is 2020. We are all excited because we are hoping to launch Company of Heroes 3 late this year. My name is John. I am on the community team here at on the Company of Heroes franchise, and I am joined by some of our terrific designers today. So we'll go around and introduce them now before we get into what we're going to be discussing today. So, joining me, first up, we have Sacha.
Hello, my name's Sacha. I'm the lead single player designer on Company of Heroes 3.
And of course, we also have some fantastic mission designers. First up, we have Benoit.
Good morning, sports fans. I am Benoit Busk, and as John said, I'm a mission designer on Company Heroes 3.
And last but certainly not least, we have David.
Hi, I'm David Milne, and this is going to shock you guys. I'm also a mission designer on Company of Heroes 3. The odds.
Well, welcome everyone. Very, very excited to have the missions team here to discuss, single player, all things campaign as well. But folks, this is something that I always like to ask the team anytime I have them on the Twitch show here with us. But what has it really been like, working on Company of Heroes 3 for the last few years? Now that players have been able to go hands-on with two pre-alpha previews and have seen what you've been working on. How does that feel? Sacha, maybe you go first.
Sure, yeah. The last couple of years have been fascinating. I mean, for a lot of us, continuing to work on games during this time has been unusual. Every company's probably been different and every developer's been different, but yeah, we've been lucky. I think Sega has been so great to us, and Relic has done such a great job of supporting our team and making this easy for us. And it's been excellent. Honestly, I think the development process on Company of Heroes 3 has been so positive. The way that we've been interacting with the community and getting regular feedback and doing the pre-alphas has been extremely valuable. And I'm just happy that this is the way game development is trending, that there's so much more interaction between the fans and the players and the developers, that we can learn from each other and we can build a game that is really exactly what people want, that we're trying to listen and build the features and content that people are eager to see. So yeah, I've had a great time. Honestly, the last couple of years, it's been challenging for sure in a lot of ways. Making games never easy in the best of circumstances, but yeah, it's it's been very rewarding all the same.
What,
Yeah.
what about you, Benoit? How are you feeling now that we announced it last July, but up until then we couldn't talk about it. But now players have had a chance to go hands-on. So how are you feeling about everything?
I'll be honest, it's always felt a little bit different because we've had kind of the closed community and the council of sort of representatives of players who have like kind of like always been in on it with us. Um, and that's meant that it's kind of like obviously we haven't been able to talk about it, but there's always been kind of like an audience of people who have an appetite for what you're doing and are excited to see updates, and you are allowed to share, and you are allowed to sort of participate in this kind of back and forth with them. It's definitely been rewarding. It has kept us very busy.
Yeah, that's a bit of an understatement. But David, I know you were a huge Company of Heroes fan even before you joined the
Hmm.
team here at Relic. So what has this all been like for you?
Um, yeah, it's been wild to actually get to work on this. Yeah, I've been a fan of Company of Heroes a lot longer than I've been a developer for Company of Heroes. So, and it's a game that me and a group of friends, Company Heroes 1 and 2 is a game that we still, play together. And so, being able to finally talk about it publicly, I was just like, you guess what I'm working on? Like, and getting to finally like reveal that to that
Yeah.
group of friends was like a really cool moment. So,
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure that was a real thrill. But I guess my next question is, what is this group really looking forward to? We have obviously a lot of work to do before we get to launch. But what are you excited about in the months ahead, Sasha?
Well, I mean, as always, we're excited to reveal more and more of the game. Naturally, it's everything that's sort of under wraps is a little bit we want to be getting feedback on everything and getting responses and hearing, what people like and what they want us to work on. So I'm just eager for more to be out in the open for everyone to give us feedback on. I think also I'm really excited to get more input on the style of single player that we're doing this time, this sort of campaign, and the fact that it's meant to be more of the player's story, that it's a more systemic, open-ended, player-driven campaign, and I really want people to hear more about it and finally, of course, get their hands on it and give us feedback. And we want this thing to be active for a long time. And the campaigns we've done in the past, we should be really happy with them and proud of them. But we are trying something different. We're not leaving behind what we've done before. There will still certainly be much of the same kind of storytelling and mission content and challenges and encounters. But I'm really eager to get more input and feedback on the kind of single player experience we're delivering this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why we're just engaging in this whole co-development process with our players as well. David, what are you excited about in the next couple of months before we get to launch?
Honestly, it's been fun to see more and more stuff. Certainly in the months, kind of like couple months leading up to now, and as we go forward, just more and more stuff kind of coming online, and seeing the more final versions of things. Of course, throughout production for years, so much of it is like gray box and placeholder and stuff, and it's in this last run that you're really starting to see the game kind of come together in a big way. And we're seeing, the artists are in, the chat posting all the new stuff that they're building, and it's always cool to see that stuff. So yeah, that just seeing all of it like really start to come together, I think is what I've been enjoying for the last little bit, and that's always exciting stuff to see.
Yeah. What about you, Benoit? Anything that's you're kind of keeping an eye on, or just super excited about before players can actually go hands on with the final game?
Yeah, I think sort of jumping off of what David was saying, for a very long time while we're sort of building the game, we're doing so with like not everything is like at levels of fully completion. And as we're getting like into the sort of later end development part of the process, one of the things that I always look forward to is the integration of our audio. Um, I think Company of Heroes is really, really strong at creating just so much drama just in like the soundscape it's going to create. So like situations that like we're all familiar with and that we've all sort of been playing through over and over again as we're iterating on these missions, where it's, my guys, your guys, guns are firing, items are being like grenades are being tossed. Having good sound and having just a complete audio environment elevates that from being just like a moment into a surprising degree of drama. And so I'm really looking forward to sort of like the way that we're now being able to inject a sense of like urgency and drama and grandiose sort of experience into stuff that we've already seen and we thought like we knew. So it's been a lot of fun to see everything in a light where it feels everything feels much more weighty and real.
Mhm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm actually going to drop a bit of a bombshell, a bit of an exclusive for the folks watching on Twitch right now. But in the last multiplayer pre-alpha, we had a lot of feedback saying, "Hey, there's something up with the machine gun sounds. Like there's something a little bit off." And one of the things that I would always say is like, a lot of sounds are still placeholder, especially in the current iteration of the game, and a lot of those things are still being worked on and finalized. Even we still haven't recorded some of that stuff, and it still needs to be input. So fear not, friends. The machine guns are sounding a lot better, at least on our internal builds. So they should be up to snuff by the time you go hands on again.
We're getting those good pew pews.
Yeah,
the best pew pews.
Absolutely. So before we really get into our topic for the day, again, I just want to remind folks, if you want to stay up to date on everything that we're doing with Company of Heroes and with Company of Heroes 3, you're going to want to follow us on your social platform of choice. So on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, that is at Company of Heroes. You can also join the co-development program by signing up at companyofheroes.com. Check out our forums at community.companyofheroes.com. And if you want to chat more casually with other players and some of the team, you can find us at discord.gg/company of heroes. And of course, be sure to follow us right here, twitch.tv/relic entertainment. And make sure you leave those notifications on so you can find out when we're live, just like this. So what are we talking about today? Obviously, single player and campaign. We're going to do a pretty deep dive on missions, and we're going to be answering your questions along the way. So if you have questions for the designers that I have with me here today, throw them in the chat. We'll try and address them as we can, and, if they're relevant. And obviously there are certain things that we can speak to and that we can't, but we'll definitely answer as much as we can. And if we have time at the end, maybe we'll do a quick Q&A, like rapid fire. So I guess to speak about single player, what our vision is for single player in the campaign, the last time players went hands-on with CoH3 single player was all the way back, last July. That's when we announced Company of Heroes 3. We had our pre-alpha preview. And that was the first time we showed off our dynamic campaign map, along with a handful of missions, a bunch of skirmishes and more there. So I guess I wanted to talk about what our goals with the CoH3 campaign are at a bit of a high level, and then we can maybe dig a bit deeper on all those parts and how we're designing our missions. But just to set things up, Sacha, I asked this question of the gameplay team, when I had them on. So I'll ask you as well. But designer is a very broad title, and it can encompass, quite a few things. So could you maybe describe what it is that you and your team are responsible for in Company of Heroes 3?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, designer, it is an odd title, and it's one that even design teams will sometimes talk about. What exactly is the definition of our job? What do we do? And I went to a GDC talk one time about technical design, and the start of the talk was, what is a technical designer? And everyone was like, well, I don't know. And then the guy kind of defined it, and it's probably not what you think, but yeah, design is such a variety of things. It can be the kind of idea that a lot of people have of high level design and being kind of like a blue sky person who says, this is what the game should be, and here are the grand ideas for the story and the world, and that is a real job that exists that some people have. And then there are people who are just extremely competent at specific aspects of design, so building environments and maps, or building great encounters or mission objectives, or making characters that feel really responsive, or creating interesting abilities and weapons and that kind of thing. So it's such a huge variety. But yeah, for us, for the single player team, we own that high level vision of what a campaign should be, what the single player experience should be like for the game, and then drilling down into every detail of what the player controls, what they're fighting against, how they fight against it, the types of mission and skirmish experiences that you'll have in single player. So we do, the research into the historical background of all the missions, the timelines, the important events that we want to capture throughout the campaign, and then what types of weaponry and vehicles would have been present during that battle. How do we take a huge piece of the war and encapsulate it in a mission that might be 30 to 60 minutes long? So it really is all the way from looking at a continent or a country and saying, okay, we have to try to like understand this huge piece of geography and history, all the way down to what type of rifle would this soldier have been carrying at this time, and does it make sense in terms of our mission objectives? And yeah, so it's a lot. Design is a lot, but that's
Yeah.
generally what we're up to.
Nice. So I'm curious what a typical day looks like for each of you. Benoit, maybe you can start like your average day as a mission designer. What does that entail?
Sure. I think that obviously the needs and sort of the things that drive mission design on a day-to-day basis evolves over time as the project changes. A lot of the early stage of Company of Heroes development, a year, 2 years ago, involved a lot more research, involved a lot more sort of conceptualizing ideas, and then the state that we're in kind of now is we have a lot of the content is at a state where like we know we're doing it, we know kind of what we want out of it, and it's a matter of like going in and making the magic happen in a number of places right now. So in a current day environment, I would be looking at a mission that exists already, and we're going in and we're just sort of adding elements that is mindful of what a player is seeing. So we're not just like making things because we know we have to complete it. We're sort of trying to approach the game as like, is this combat, is this encounter, is this timing of this VO, like, are these things ready to be player facing? If I trying to sort of put yourself in the mind of someone who's seeing some of this content for the first time, you have to think like, is this a satisfying experience unfolding for someone who's seeing this for the first time? And kind of making and now that kind of mindset is guiding a lot of the changes we're making rather than earlier when we've got like a big gray field and there's nothing in it and it's just a matter of like we got to get stuff in it. This last leg of development is really about like, is a player going to be really excited when this stuff happens?
Mhm. What about you, David? Much the same as Benoit, or what is your
Yeah,
sort of day encompass?
Ben Benoit really nailed it. That's a big part of it. Probably if you were to talk a year ago or more ago, half the time we're doing the research, we're pitching missions to each other. It's a lot of paper planning, documentation, that kind of stuff, and then the other half of the time would be kind of developing these missions at an early stage. But now we're not pitching any new missions, right? We're we're building them now, and that's the stage that we're at. And so, uh, you know, log in the morning and I get in the engine and I start tweaking the mission.
Mhm.
That's what we're doing all day now.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic to hear, and hopefully, folks have a bit of a better idea what you're actually responsible for and what you're kind of doing moment to moment. Sasha, I've got a bit of a bigger question for you, and this is really about our approach to the single player experience. I'm very curious how that single player experience or that campaign experience has changed or evolved from Co1 and Co2, to where we are today. Has our approach to that it changed at all, or is it, did it really, depend on what our objectives were with Co3? Has our philosophy to design evolved, or even the way that we think about designing the single player, has that shifted at all? I know it's a bit of a very broad, open-ended question, but I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the Relic's philosophy as a whole has not changed based on what we're doing with Company of Heroes 3, but this game is trying some different trying a different approach in terms of the kind of single player experience we want to focus on. So the previous games, there was a variety in their single player as well. Company of Heroes 1 had this very, immersive, narrative-driven cinematic experience that I think really holds up and is still excellent. And then if you jump ahead, Company of Heroes 2 did a similar style of campaign, and then we diverged with the expansion with Ardennes Assault, which was more open-ended and systemic and player-driven. And if you look at other Relic franchises as well, we've done meta maps and we've done kind of open-ended campaigns before. So this time around, I think we decided we want players to be more in control of the single player experience, and we want everyone to be able to kind of craft their own story as they play. And that's always been a big part of Company of Heroes, is the stories, the individual player stories of getting into a match, multiplayer, a skirmish, and this crazy thing happening that you kind of tell your friends about or think about afterwards. And the one that always comes to mind is this crazy, sometimes frustrating, sometimes thrilling experience of a vehicle going out of control, but still managing to fire off a few shots before it hits a wall and explodes and it kills your enemies, very important Vet 3 infantry squad or something. And you just think that was ridiculous. I can't believe that happened. So things like that. We want those kinds of systemic player experiences in the campaign. And I'm not saying we want them to be as random as that necessarily, but we want that variety. We want people to have their own unique experience through the campaign. So Yes, we have taken on a different philosophy this campaign, but it's not that Relic is changing its perspective overall. We're just trying a different approach, and I think when players get their hands on the final game, they'll see that we're doing our best to ensure that what was there in the old games that people loved is not gone. You'll still find those same experiences, the same kind of rich story-driven content, mixed in with this more systemic player-driven content.
Mhm. So you mentioned the Ardennes Assault, and I just actually fired it up the other day because it had been a while since I played it, and I forgot how much fun it is. But obviously, I think that's kind of where we drew a lot of our inspiration for Co3's dynamic campaign mapping in Italy. So I'm curious how some of the systems and ideas from the Ardennes Assault may have evolved to where they are today in Co3, or maybe where they've changed and sort of like veered away from what we did in Ardennes Assault.
There isn't a lot that we have looked at from those earlier games and said, we have to do it differently. I think what we've looked at is what can we expand upon that worked, that people resonated with. So
Mhm.
the control of companies that you develop and upgrade and improve over time is something that we really wanted to expand on and make more interesting. And personally, I feel like progression drives a lot of my gaming. That I really feel like if I get invested in something that I'm improving and building out in a way that I enjoy, then that really keeps me connected to a game. So this time around, we have more companies with more upgrades and unlocks and options for the player to invest in, that we really think there's going to be a lot of like interesting different builds and varieties, and players finding interesting strategies based on what they unlock and upgrade, and missions playing out differently depending on what tools you use and have access to. So that's something that I think we've really pulled from Ardennes and from some earlier games, and tried to expand upon and make deeper and more interesting.
Yeah, you just mentioned the company system, and we obviously players were able to go hands on with that in the pre-alpha preview in July, and then when we did the multiplayer pre-alpha just in December, players got to see the battle group system, and I'm wondering if you can maybe talk a little bit about the differences between those systems and how they'll augment the different factions between multiplayer and single player. Because just again for context, the battle group system is sort of an amalgamation or a new take on Co1's doctrine system and Co2's commander system. Whereas in the single player for Co3, the company system is going to work a little bit differently than that. So I'm wondering if you can maybe clarify those differences between the multiplayer and single player.
Yeah, of course. So for the multiplayer battle group system, it's certainly inspired a lot by Company of Heroes 1 and the Doctrine system, and things we learned from Code 2 about what worked and what didn't in terms of maybe the amount of options and the kind of almost overwhelming variety that players had at a certain point in that game's life cycle, ongoing life cycle. But the single player in Company of Heroes 3, our progression system and the company system is built around player choice, and ensuring that you can upgrade and improve your companies the way you want to. So it has to be different than the battle groups, because the battle groups are built around a 30 to 60 minute experience in a match. Company progression is built around many hours.
Hmm.
So we needed to ensure that there were enough meaningful things for players to upgrade and improve. So although the base abilities and units are mostly shared between multiplayer and single player, there is an additional layer of single player growth and progression, new upgrades and improvements to abilities, and special campaign specific upgrades. So we needed that sense of long-term progression, and it's split between a variety of companies that you'll control. So it really is about creating player choice in the tools that they have available, both on the campaign map layer and within missions.
Hmm. No, that's a fantastic summation. I'm curious also what sorts of maybe I'll throw this to Benoit and David, because you're obviously having to design missions with some of these systems in mind, but I'm curious what sorts of like abilities or like unit unlocks and customization are players going to be able to see in the companies, and how is that going to potentially impact what they're doing in the missions? Benoit, maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Certainly. I think one of the sort of like most striking and clear delineations that sort of affects mission design is our company system allows the player to decide if their focus is going to be mechanized or not. So one of the sort of things that we have to be mindful of when we're designing his missions is the player has to make an active choice to come to a space with the ability to go mechanized in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you are a company that is sort of specialized in infantry operations or airborne operations, that's a tool that you may not have. That's a tool that you might have to spend exponentially more resources to have than the mechanized company. So we're really trying to kind of create a space where if you come in with these tools, you're going to have you're going to sort of be challenged by this part, but maybe this part you're going to get to feel really successful because the tools you've brought are very, very strong. And then on the other foot, making sure that that is sort of inversed, where if you've brought the specialized infantry, then you've got moments where because you have specialized infantry, you're going to be very, very successful, where you weren't with mechanized companies, but there'll be situations where specialized infantry will need to be challenged in a way that, like, if you were mechanized, this would be the thing that you're strong against. This would be the situations where you're strong against. Um, and that I think has been a rewarding but difficult sort of balance to find, especially because, like, when we consider mechanized in the context of Company of Heroes, like especially its multiplayer, we think like that's the powerful end.
Mm-hmm.
And we have had to definitely kind of figure out ways to redefine if mechanized specifically means the top end of what you expect to do in a match. Like we need the mechanized company to feel like it's not just coming into a space with the best things. Um, and that I think has been good overall for the missions to sort of tackle and consider those elements, but has been pretty tricky because, like, how do you make it rewarding to bring soldiers to a tank fight?
Yeah. No, that's a great summation. Thanks, Benoit. I kind of wanted to address a couple questions that I saw in the chat. David, I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to like where missions are at right now in the development process. Someone asked like, oh, on a scale of 1 to 10, how finished are they? um, so I know that's a bit of a curveball, but like, where are we
so
sort of
we
at in that process? I suppose.
so when we develop missions, we have different sort of stages of doneness, right? We go through a phase where, kind of like I said before, where we're doing the research, we're pitching, we're making the paper plans, we're discussing them as a group a lot and making all kinds of adjustments. And we go on to what is V1, which is like just the first playable, very rough. It's all the gray box. Actually, people saw it on the codev site. Benoit actually wrote an article that kind of outlines the some of these stages and how we go through that process. And so we have V1, which is first kind of proof of concept, and then V2, which is more of a finalizing what the mission is going to be about, finalizing the objectives and the encounters and what units you're going to be fighting. And then V3 is more of the polish stage where we're doing um, some of the things that we were talking about before, like with the audio, making sure that all of the audio cues are in and that the narrative is exactly what we need it to be, and really, really fine tuning some of those things. Um, I guess a lot of our missions at this point are in a V2 or V3 stage, right? Like I said before, we're not really pitching new missions. We're deep into the into the development of these things and really focusing on not like adding tons of new stuff, but like polishing and making sure what we have is ready to be seen by the players and is up to that kind of quality bar that we really want this game to be.
Yeah. Just to clarify a couple confused comments, when we say V1 and V2, we're talking about like version 1 and version 2. We're not talking about the rockets. Um,
I'm not, yeah, not the V1 and V2 rockets,
Mm-hmm.
not the V3. Was that was like
Yeah,
a cannon they had in Normandy, I think, that didn't get built.
Yeah, we use the V as a shorthand for versioning, and we use that
Yeah.
to kind of describe the level of doneness of a mission. I think the most explicit answer to the question of like how done are the missions is that several of them are almost done, but also the nature of what we do in V3 is like polish and iteration and just making sure the entire experience is as sort of like enjoyable as possible. Frankly, that job is one that could never be done.
Yeah.
Like, if you were to ask us, do we want extra time to just keep polishing missions? Like, we'll never say no.
Designers
Um,
will never stop tinkering with things. That is just
right.
not in our nature. There's always, oh, but what if I just moved it slightly over here and then it'd be a little bit, like we will never stop. That's why we have producers to say, this is
You're,
done enough now.
this is done. This is
We
done.
have to launch a game at some point.
yeah.
Yeah. So again, thank you both for sort of answering that question. Throwing it back to you, Sasha, and speaking more to some of the systems on the dynamic campaign map. We have a number of new things that we're introducing, along with the dynamic campaign map and systems to sort of complement it for the player to utilize, during that invasion of Italy. I'm curious if it was a challenge to implement some of those new things, like maybe it was the partisan system or the air and the naval units. Can you maybe speak to some of the challenges with implementing those types of things?
Yes, I mean the campaign map itself was an enormous amount of effort. I mean, although we have a foundation going back to earlier games, going back to Ardennes Assault, we built this from the ground up, and it is absolutely the most expansive and complex turn-based map or mode that we've ever made. It's really the detail of the map itself in terms of both the gameplay interaction and the art. It's enormously detailed, and there was so much work to do to make sure that the movement felt right, that the even just the metrics of it, the size and shape of everything, how much space an individual company takes up, or a howitzer emplacement, or a town. We had to learn so much, and we had good reference points with games that we respect and we could look at. But if for Company of Heroes, this had really never been done, so it was enormously difficult. And the people who worked on it are wizards. It's so impressive to see what they managed to accomplish. And then for us on the design side, once all the technology was there and we knew how to use everything, then I would say one of the biggest challenges became, how do we make sure that what you're doing on the turn-based campaign map layer, connects naturally and usefully to the missions. And that means that as designers, we have to kind of relinquish control in some ways. So with the earlier games, with more linear campaigns, we can say in this mission, you gain access to the T-34 tank, or the Sherman with the bulldozer, or Rangers or something. And this is the first time you get to use them. And this is the first time you face this type of enemy. And this time around, the control, we're handing so much of it to the player. We're saying, you'll unlock these tools when you have the resources to do so, and you'll be able to bring them into these missions. And we can't pace things out in the same way. We have to accommodate. And we still have encounters built around specific unit types and that kind of thing. But really, this time we had to work hard to make sure that we were making the missions adaptable and flexible enough that they could suit what players had unlocked, what abilities they had, what support they have. So on the campaign map, you can bring in support from nearby companies and locations. So if you're attacking a port and you've got an airfield nearby, and you also have a supporting company, or partisan assistance, you can bring in these special abilities or support features, and we needed to make sure that those are supported in every mission, that they have a meaningful impact. So yes, it's been really challenging to make the game respond in a satisfying way to all the things the player can do. But we think we're getting there. We think we're pretty close.
Yeah, you actually stole one of my upcoming questions, but I'll maybe put this to Benoit and David as well, because I imagine that challenge of designing around the player's choices and the flexibility that we're giving the player in making a lot of those choices. I imagine it must be very difficult when you're designing a mission, right? Which is a very like tailored encounter. So I'm curious. Obviously that flexibility and that choice is really important for us to provide that for the player. That's the experience that we're trying to capture. But like Sasha was saying, you may not always know what company or what even faction a player is going to bring into a mission. What unlocks they'll have, what detachments, what abilities they'll already have. So David, I'm curious, how do you take those types of factors into account when you're designing those missions and when you're designing those encounters?
Um, yeah, we can't make any of those assumptions for sure. So when we come into mission, we think, I guess, a little bit less about um, how the player is going to solve these problems and focus more on what kind of challenge are we providing. And like we're going to put an HMG in this building, and you know, like Sasha said, we kind of have to like relinquish control a little bit, which is sometimes a little hard for designers. We like to like I said, we like to set up these things, but we're going to put an HMG in the building, and it's up to the player whether they drop paratroopers behind that building or hit it with a mortar or throw a smoke grenade and run up, right? Like these are or just charge it with a Sherman bulldozer. That's an option too if they have that unlocked, right? And so we just have to be way more open with how the player decides to solve these problems and focus more on setting up the problems to be solved. um and there are going to be situations where the player comes across an encounter that they happen to be uniquely upgraded for, and they say, "Great, I have the tool to solve this problem because I upgraded it, in my company," and that's a great moment. Or maybe they don't have come in with a company that they haven't quite upgraded, and they come across an encounter that's gonna just be a little bit more challenging for them. And they kind of have to work with what they have to kind of get around this challenge or to break through. Um, and so, difficulty in terms of that can be a little bit more flexible in our missions. If we have a mission like an airfield mission that has a whole bunch of flak cannons and whirlwinds or whatever around, um, it's going to be a little bit tougher as the paratroopers,
Mhm.
right? If a lot of your abilities and a lot of your power comes from your air force being used, and there's flak cannons on the map, you're going to have to find a way around that. And so uh, a lot of the missions we make are a little bit more open in that sense of we're giving the player more of a sandbox, and they have the toys to play in it, kind of a thing. And it's up to them to figure out their way around the problem with the tools that they have.
Mhm. So speaking of design challenges, Benoit, maybe you can answer this question from the chat. Someone was asking about how we research a lot of the missions and the battles that we're going to be portraying in Company of Heroes 3. In the past, we may have been able to take trips to actually, visit some of these sites. The pandemic makes that a little bit more difficult. Everyone's working at home. Um, so I'm curious what the research process has been like for you and the team when you're planning a mission or you're thinking about a conflict, in a certain part of the Italian map.
Yeah, I have not. Like full disclosure, I have not been to any of the places in Italy that I am going to represent in the game. Um, it is an unfortunate reality of COVID-19 that international travel has just been really, really dangerous and really, really inadvisable. So we haven't had a lot of opportunities to send team members out to go and get sort of like a real world feel for some of these places. I have a list of places I would like to visit when COVID is over enough that I can go to Italy, just to see like what I have built in game. What is it actually like to be in those spaces?
For
Which is
sure.
going to hopefully be fun. But as far as like research going into some of these encounters go, we're kind of having to having to think about it across certain tent poles. One thing that is really important to sort of be mindful of as we're doing a lot of this research is we want to give the player on the campaign level kind of an unprecedented level of control that they haven't actually had in previous Company of Heroes games, with the closest analog being kind of Ardennes Assault. And because of that, there's already some natural friction with like how the events are historically unfolding, how the events of the Italian theater in World War II actually unfolded, because we're letting the player kind of go in and change the course of history a little bit just by virtue of the kinds of decisions that they're making. So uh, we are sort of researching important locations. We're trying to recreate moments that we feel are going to create sort of like excellent and rewarding gameplay opportunities. But on the other hand, we're also trying to compare them against like our company progression system and making sure that like if the player does a thing that acts entirely opposite what the historical precedent was, like that is a choice they can make. That is a choice that we have to support, and that is something that's going to help make their version of the Company of Heroes 3 single player campaign be unique to them. So a lot of the research that we keep boils down to like what are interesting topographical locations, what are interesting geographical locations, what are unique technological threats that we can present to the player at this time. Um, Roughly in the timeline of the Italian theater, what technology was available to the Germans, and how are we going to represent like that timeline in the abstract? Because things like the Winter Line took months and months and months for allies to make any progress in, and just because of the available technology and tactics that the player might have access to in the campaign layer, um, it's not going to take the player months and months and months to do stuff. So like how do we reconcile that like Germany and the Allies had so much time to sort of prepare and advance and change what their tactics and what their technology was in that time, when maybe, you know, I don't want to give away what any of the closed group testers are doing, but there have already been some incredibly inventive ways to not do the thing that we expected. And
Players are really good at breaking the game that we're building for them. That's for
Not
sure.
breaking, finding alternative routes.
yeah, um,
Yeah. No, that's terrific, Benoit. Thank you. So Sasha, a couple more questions about the sort of the overall campaign map and single player experience. I know, um, we when we did the pre-alpha preview in July, we had the companies and we had the detachment system. And one of the things that I think players commented on the most during that preview was the detachment system. And based on their feedback and a lot of internal discussions, we kind of made the decision, we need to reassess the system. We need to potentially implement some changes. So I'm curious if you could maybe explain how that happened. What was maybe the initial problem that we saw? What were players saying? And then how are we now addressing that moving forward?
Yeah, of course. So the pre-alpha slice in July was so valuable for the single player team to learn what was working and what wasn't in the community's mind about the turn-based aspect of the game, and to some degree in the missions as well. So yes, one of the big things that came out of it was detachments, which were at the time controllable units on the campaign map, with a variety of different uses and abilities. So you had engineers, mortars, medics, a variety of different. I think we had just straight up combat riflemen detachments, and they could be moved independently. They had their own movement points and action points, and they couldn't perform all the same actions as a company, but they were independent actors. So you can think of them in the RTS that they would just be more squads in your global unit control that you could select and move around. And what we found from feedback and from our own testing is that it was too much to control, and it was just too much. It was building out the turn-based experience further than it actually needed to go. we have to balance this ratio, this kind of golden or like perfect idealized ratio of how much time the player is spending on the dynamic campaign map versus how much time they're in RTS gameplay. Because at its core, Company of Heroes is a real-time strategy game. And we want players who really prefer the real time to be able to focus on that and not feel like they're stuck doing stuff that they don't necessarily want to do. But on the other side, if people really resonate with the turn-based gameplay and they love the campaign map, you can spend more time. There is more for you to do there. But detachments were taking it a little too far. It was too much to control, too much cognitive load, too much micromanagement. So we scaled them back. They are now embedded within companies. They provide benefits, they'll grant abilities, they'll give you additional units when you start a mission, but they're not independent actors on the campaign map. And as another example of feedback that we received that we're working on now, in that pre-alpha slice, it was instantaneous to capture many locations on the campaign map. And we realized that the level of friction there was actually lacking. So that's a place where we added more depth and a little more time commitment in some cases, where in order to capture locations, you have to commit more resources or time. And we certainly don't want to make it tedious, but we needed to provide a more interesting challenge when players were capturing different locations on the map. So that's more important feedback that we got from that slice, and it's been really valuable.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and I'm glad that we were able to, put the game in players' hands early and sort of get that feedback from them, because it really like validated some of the discussions that we were already having internally, and it allows us to make these changes early before we even get to launch. So one of the big questions that we're always seeing is, your campaign is set in Italy. How are the Italians going to factor into that, right? So, Sasha, I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to that a little bit. I know we've already said that we're hoping to represent them on both sides of the conflict, but could you maybe speak a little bit more in detail about how they're going to show up in the single player experience?
Yeah, of course. So I think most people who are listening to this probably know that Italy represented a very unique combatant in the war, and that earlier in the war, they fought alongside the Axis. There were Italian forces throughout the Mediterranean fighting with the Axis. And then in September 1943, Italy capitulated, and Mussolini quickly lost his power, and the Italian forces were disarmed. So what you have in the Italian campaign is German forces who have access to Italian weaponry and vehicles, and you have Italian partisans. There were many, many thousands of Italian partisans who fought back against the Axis in Italy throughout 1943 into 1944. So we have to represent both sides. We have to show the military force of Italy in concert with the Axis, but we also need to represent the Italian resistance. I think it's very important to show both sides of it, and it's a complicated challenge, but I do think people will be happy with what they see in the final game. I know there are a lot of questions about how much Italian representation. You want to know the number of units and how many vehicles, and will there be a full faction? And of course, you want to know that. And all I can say is I think people will be satisfied. I hope that within the first year after launch, we can offer more and more. We can build on what we have. But I'll also say that for our multiplayer developers and for our artists and animators, they're already building so much content that balance is a real issue. And if we ship with one too many factions, we really think about not just the content creation itself is a huge challenge, but every time we add a faction, it has a massive, massive effect on how the multiplayer experience feels. The permutations, multiply, and we need to work so hard to get the balance right. So a full faction, we can't say a yes or no to exactly what you're going to see in the final game right now, but we can say that there will be more units, more than ever before, and we need to work really hard to get the balance just right.
Yeah, no, that's a great response, and I couldn't have said it better. So thanks, Sasha. Now I kind of wanted to shift gears and maybe dive a little bit deeper on mission design. So I'm curious, David and Benoit, what is it that you've potentially worked on already in Co3 that our players may have already seen or gone hands on with? Because I know there's a lot that they haven't. So David, maybe you could go first. What have you worked on that players may have seen in the pre-alpha preview last summer?
So the missions I worked on was the Pomeliano, so the first airfield mission that the players played in the demo. That was one of my missions, and then there was a mission, and we referred to it as Tauba Hunt. I actually don't remember what it was referred to as in the pre-alpha preview, but it was the mission where you're hunting down General Tauba in his tiger tank, that little kind of mini boss fight mission. Those are the two missions that I contributed to the pre-alpha preview. Then, I suppose, if you've been reading the forums and the blogs, Anzio as well
Right. Um,
is one of my missions.
yeah, and we can get into that a bit more. What about you, Benoit? What have you worked on so far that players have seen?
Well, the slice of Italy that we used for the pre-alpha preview is not the area that I have done a lot of my work in. So I think the only mission of mine in the demo is the partisan rescue in Avellino.
Okay.
And uh, there are I've been working on a number of missions that I think people will be very excited to play, but you haven't seen them yet,
A lot
and
of secrets.
I can't tell you what they are.
So I'll put the same question to both of you that I put to Sasha, but I'm curious if you can maybe speak to how maybe our approach or our philosophy around mission design may have changed or evolved from Company of Heroes 1 and 2. I mean, we already kind of spoke to the fact that like the player has a lot more flexibility and a lot more choice now, so you sort of have to anticipate that or design your encounters with that flexibility in mind. But Benoit, maybe you could speak to how maybe things have changed from the missions in Co 1 and 2 to what we're going to be seeing in Co 3.
Yeah, I think something to keep in mind, obviously, is the needs of the theater. So beyond just, oh, the mission design has changed because of our campaign layer and the unprecedented amount of freedom that we're trying to offer players by way of companies and company progression. There are some goals that we had with the Italian theater that are just sort of very different to goals that existed in Company 1 and 2. Chiefly, we wanted there to be a lot more of the reflection of urban Italy. So things are denser. There's a lot more opportunities to explore kind of garrison gameplay. Part of the reason that Breach was developed is because we anticipate there's going to be a lot more use of garrison, and we want to make sure that there's sufficient counterplay to that. Um, so part of the changes in the mission design and how we plan changes in mission design are involved with like the changes to theater and the changes that we want to make reflective of the theater. So like there are lots of hills, there's lots of winding switchback roads, there's a high degree of urban density, and all of those things present unique challenges within the scope of an RTS game. We're constantly fighting with like how dense of an environment we can create versus the fact that you have this bird's eye view camera looking into the space. The needs of the game are always such that you need to be seeing your units. You need to be able to see the full picture of the action so that you can use that information to actually engage in the strategy part of RTS. And like the conflict there is difficult but very interesting. How do we make urban parts of Italy or very hilly and sort of dense parts of Italy feel very, very evocative of those parts of the theater without compromising on the core elements that like really make Company of Heroes gameplay successful, like having like complete strategic control. Um, and also, we're introducing a tactical pause feature in this version of the game. So the player has unprecedented strategic control of a
Mhm.
single player environment. They can really orchestrate tactics on a level that just you cannot do in strictly real time. And that has meant that like some of the encounters that we're building are allowed to be a little complex because we have this like this valve that the player can release at any time with the tactical pause where they can solve multiple problems at once. Ergo, in some places in the missions, we are presenting you with multiple problems at once. And I think that's something that like other Company of Heroes games had to be very, very mindful of because you never had the ability to turn the gas off and you never had the ability to like stop time and assess your tactics. So it was careful when they chose to poke in multiple places. And that's a tool that we have now. So I guess get ready for that.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that because tactical pause is such a great feature for new and experienced players alike. So I'm very interested to see how the missions team and the designers are going to be potentially leveraging that or thinking about that as they're putting some of these challenges in front of players. Um, so sort of in that same vein, we showcased a lot in the single player pre-alpha preview last July, along with the campaign map and the main missions. We also had RTS skirmishes. And if I'm not mistaken, they also had a number of like generated objectives throughout those skirmishes. David, can you maybe explain or maybe go into some detail about like how those skirmishes will work in the single player and maybe what the difference between those experiences and like the more cultivated missions are going to be?
Yeah, for sure. So, um, all throughout the campaign map, of course, we have these specific locations like um, like Pomigliano, like Anzio, right? That's it's a set piece mission. You're going to go in. That's part of the narrative of the game. But then you have a skirmish mission, and a skirmish mission is what happens when your company meets an enemy company, kind of in the field, and they can sort of happen wherever you engage in that combat. And so it plays a little bit more like like an AI PVE skirmish match, right? But we've added a layer of objectives that you can complete during those matches, so that um, it's not just like playing comp stomp, right? There are other
Right.
things that you're doing on the map to kind of like change that and sort of move the focus just from like killing the enemy units to other aspects of the map and other objectives you need to complete. So yeah, just it's something to again just give you more more things to do with those companies that you're upgrading. They can kind of be a proving ground almost
Yeah.
for some things. I've just unlocked a new tank and then a couple new abilities, and I see an enemy company over there. I'm gonna go get it, and then you go and you test out your new abilities in like a head to head fight kind of a thing. That's sort of the role that the skirmishes kind of play in the map.
Yeah. So speaking to some of that customization and a lot of that voice that we're giving players, um, pairing that with a dynamic campaign map in Italy, I feel like that kind of means the single player experience. At least I imagine what we're hoping for is that it's going to be extremely replayable. So maybe Sasha, maybe you can speak to that. Like, was that sort of a core focus, is ensuring that like players could do multiple runs through of the invasion of Italy, and I'm curious how that affects some of the decisions that we've made or some of the design problems that we've faced.
Yes. So replayability is a big part of, making a systemic campaign. I would say first on the list, though, our biggest priority was to create a variety of campaign experiences based on what a player chooses to do. So my campaign is different from yours, is different from our other friends, is different from your mom's. Like we want everyone to have their own experience with unique progression, with a unique path through the map, with the army that you build can be distinct. How many companies of what kind and what upgrades are you using? Are you pushing up the East Coast or the West Coast? Are you doing it simultaneously? Are you going centrally? Are you navigating by transporting your companies from port to port along the coast? Are you transporting airborne companies between airfields? we wanted to make sure that there were a lot of choices to have your own campaign experience, and naturally that leads to replayability. There's going to be more variance, and the missions themselves. So we have significant set piece missions that we put a ton of effort into, and that take place in very famous locations and represent famous battles, and we really want everyone to see all of those. And we also have a lot of smaller missions, some that are more systemic. We have skirmishes. These are optional. Almost all of them, we're going to make so much of it player guided that we don't want to force your hand into playing through a golden path and say, sorry, you can't advance until you've done A, B, or C. We really do want to keep the game as open as possible. And that, of course, leads to replayability. So I'm really interested to see how people, what their path is through the game. Like when we get metrics back after this thing launches and we get to see the kind of experience people have of the completionist trying to do everything, and how preposterously overpowered will you get, and can we accommodate that?
Right.
Is it okay, and how do we tune for it? And then for the person who wants to put the game on the highest difficulty and try to beat it in 3 hours or whatever the fastest possible time is, that's going to be remarkable to see as well, that people will do things that we just don't expect. And of course, that wasn't possible in the past with a linear campaign. You could play it as quick as, there was a hard cap on how fast things could be, or how diverse or varied they could be. Now the variance is going to be, so much higher, and it's going to be really interesting to see the variety of experiences that people have.
Hmm. Yeah. So again, sort of speaking to that variety of experience and the flexibility that the player is going to have. Maybe I'll put this to Benoit. Like, I'm curious how we go about determining a player's objectives in a mission. Is it this? I think you kind of spoke to this a little bit, but like, is it this balance between historical events and capturing the fun, or is there like a very specific experience that we're hoping to capture for the player when we're like determining objectives and like the flow of a mission?
Um, like many things in sort of how we confront the historical representation of what we're building, it's kind of a compromise between both of those goals. At the end of the day, the game, like we want it to be above all else fun and engaging. But there is I think, an unmistakable benefit to uh, sort of really leaning in and evoking sort of the history whenever possible. And so it's kind of a balancing act between, like, we can create a unique and absolutely drenched in sort of historical authenticity moment, but if it is representative of something that we think isn't going to work as an objective, there is kind of a back and forth of, like, how can we accommodate this as an objective if it's not going to be fun? Um, and like I said, at the end of the day, ultimately the goal is fun. The goal is
Hmm.
to have, like, an experience that players are going to sort of be challenged and engaged with, but also are going to find deeply rewarding, and going to sort of push them to keep going. And the most successful way to do that is for them to be fun. And there are certain kinds of company gameplay that we just know are going to be successful. We know that players are going to enjoy moments where they have to hunker down, and we're telling them that the enemy is coming in large numbers, and they are, analyzing the space to try and find the best positions to take defensively. We know that it is going to be fun when the player has opportunities to sort of like come into a conflict in progress. So that maybe they're sort of like acting in tandem with an AI. Um, there are situations that, like, we know those are going to be hits.
Hmm.
If the sort of like golden utopian ideal is when that situation can meld with a historical precedent that we've created.
Right.
Um, so, situations where we know that, like, historically there was a huge defensively oriented battle in this position, that lets us have just like that lets us know that we're going to have, like, kind of like an easy win there. And if there are twists to that objective, if there are unique qualities of, like, perhaps there was a certain piece of technology that was very, very important in this, or perhaps this was the stage of a particular stealth maneuver or tactical maneuver that the Allies had made that put them in this situation, then it's so worth it for us to really lean into that because we know we're going to land in a spot that like Company of Heroes does really well and does really successfully. And for those who like to sort of look at what we're doing and who are history buffs or just like enthusiasts about the theater, be able to have them see and recognize like, oh, they are honoring this part of the history and this situation is very fun. Not every situation that we have encountered in Company 3 has able to operate harmoniously like that, but that's always what we're chasing.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good to hear, and I think we'll keep players happy. So for those that missed it, we published a really fantastic deep dive on mission design on the community forums from David and Benoit. It was, or I should rephrase, Benoit wrote it, but it was about David's mission. So thank you both for helping put that together. It was a very very long but really comprehensive look at how we design a mission from start to finish. So David, that's about your mission, Anzio, whereas a quite a famous battle during the Italian campaign. So I'm curious if you could maybe briefly, sum up what it was like sort of designing that mission, and specifically what I'm hoping you could maybe address is the thing that I'm seeing with a lot of Company of Heroes 3 missions, especially like in our internal playtests, is that compared to some of our older titles, the missions feel a lot more open. There are often a number of objectives that the player can accomplish, but it seems like there's a lot of flexibility about like when or how those things need to happen. I imagine that was a really conscious choice. So I'm wondering if maybe you could address that while talking a little bit about Anzio.
For sure. I mean, like Benoit said, it's about, we want to honor that history. We want, at the end of the day, we want this to be a World War II game. We have to pull from that history, but it's gotta work in the context of a 45 or hour long mission. And those of you familiar with Anzio, it lasted a bit longer than 45 minutes. So it's all about going through that history. And when I started looking at Anzio, and when we start building any of our missions, it's a lot of looking for the documentation, looking for the personal accounts, watching documentaries even, and reading journal articles and stuff like that, and finding as much images from the period and from the time that we can find. The Allies were pretty good actually about taking a lot of aerial photographs of battle locations, and that helps a lot for when we're trying to make layouts and stuff. And so like it always comes from this place of history, but we need to condense that down into a few um, actions effectively that the player can complete, right? And we can't have them do every single part of the Battle of Anzio. Um, so I need to boil it down into kind of a few things that really capture the feeling of Anzio, right? Being trapped on the beach for months at a time, the artillery, this idea of needing to break out and break through the Germans in order to like get further into Italy and reconnect those forces.
Right.
It's those ideas that inform what you do in the game, even if the exact moment to moment of what you're doing is obviously player guided and not necessarily know going to be historically accurate, because the player is going to use whatever faction, whatever units, and go through whatever path through that mission that they can. And so when it comes to the mission at Anzio, it starts with the player coming onto the beach and coming under artillery attack from a big railway gun, right? These are kind of like the big emotional moments that, like, when you think about Anzio, those are the kinds of things that come to mind. And so those are the kinds of things that I really wanted to integrate into the mission for in terms of the gameplay and the narrative of what the player is doing in there.
Mhm.
But while still not like having so many objectives that the player kind of feels like they're being told what to do, right? We need to keep it open, and the player needs to have that freedom. And so the objective, I'm not going to tell the player to, you got to kill these, 4 AT guns, and these two HMGs and move across this way from the left. We're not going to be doing that. It's, one of the objectives is break through the defensive line around Anzio. How you accomplish that is up to you.
Right.
But that was, that's at a high level, the objective that the Allies had. They had to break out. I'm setting up the same scenario in that mission, and I'm giving the player the same objective. You can do that in the exact, way that the Allies did, or you can find your own way to do that in the mission. Yeah, that's sort of the tactic that we take when it comes to building out these missions.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic to hear. And again, for folks that missed it, like, please head to the forums, find that deep dive that Benoit wrote up about David's mission in Anzio. It's a really eye-opening account of like how that process works. So I know we're already kind of running long here, so I think we'll start to wrap up. But I got a couple important questions left before we finish up. So the first one I think I can address because I saw it a couple times in the chat, but people were asking about a potential to play through the campaign map in co-op. So that's not something that we're going to be able to target for launch. It is a request that we have heard from the community, so it's like something that we're investigating, like and taking a look at. Can't make any promises. That would be a ton of work. Maybe Sacha, you can speak to that as well, but. I definitely have seen that request a lot from players, but the reality is like, well, we need to get this game ready for launch, and to try and introduce something like that this late in the process, I think would be a bit of a headache.
Yeah, of course, it's extremely desirable. I mean, and if you were here earlier when I was talking about setting up the turn-based campaign and getting it ready, it was just a huge amount of work to build it out and get the gameplay and the metrics right, and even just the setting it up to work with the player turn alternating with the AI turn and the right pace and cadence. It was a lot for us to do, and we're happy with the results. But co-op was a layer that I think probably discussed early on and said, this is a step too far for launch. We know we can't spend 10 years making one game. So, but yeah, I mean, we'd be foolish not to consider it. So we'll discuss it more later on. And hopefully we got some good news for you eventually.
So the last big question I'll put to you, Sacha. Really, I'm curious what is the experience or the fantasy that we're really trying to capture for the player throughout the single player experience in Company of Heroes 3, right from the campaign map all the way, through to the missions. What is it that you want, or that the team wants the player to sort of feel or come away with once they've played the campaign?
It's a big question. The short answer is, we want you to feel in control. We want you to feel more than ever before in Company of Heroes that you have so much choice and power in how you accomplish your objectives, how you overcome challenges, that we want the player to tell their own story. And that's always been an element of our RTS gameplay, of the player stories and people being kind of amazed by what happened during a match. And this time around, we want that on a grander scale, that from the dynamic campaign map down into the missions and skirmishes, we want players to feel like, I'm doing this my way. I'm forging my own path through Italy. You can recreate history to some degree. You can follow the path that you know from reading the history books, or you can do things a little bit ahistorically. We're certainly not an alternate history game, but we're not going to force you to follow the path set by history. You can diverge and liberate Italy in your own way. And I think that's just an exciting thing for all of us to think about, that we've never given the player this much control before. It's scary too, that we have to accommodate it and we don't know exactly what everyone is going to do, but that's the goal. We want players to tell their own story and feel in control of the campaign.
Well, that I think that's a great place to end things. Like I said, I know we're kind of running along here, so a huge thank you to everyone that joined us today. But again, if you want to stay up to date on everything that we're doing with Company of Heroes 3, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Company of Heroes. Join our Discord, discord.gg/Company of Heroes, where you can chat with other players and some of the devs. And follow us right here on Twitch, twitch.tv/Relic Entertainment. And again, the important stuff, you're going to want to sign up for code development at companyofheroes.com. There you can also find our forums, which give you a chance to share your feedback on everything that we're doing. And again, please take a look at that big deep dive on Anzio. So before we go, though, I am going to remind folks of what our CoDev roadmap looks like for the next couple of months. So we're just wrapping up January. You can see the missions deep dive there at the end. And you can see we've got a destruction follow-up scheduled for next week. So keep those things in mind for the coming weeks. We got a lot to share, a lot to show off before we get to our eventual launch. But again, a huge thank you to my guests today. Thank you, Sacha, Benoit, David. Really appreciate having you here.
Of course, yeah. Thanks everyone for listening. This was really fun.
It's been great. I hope
Thanks for having
everybody
us.
looks forward to the game, and I hope we have deeply exciting news for you moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Me too.
So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And we'll be back next month. Again, stay tuned to all of our social channels. You may see some of these faces below me in some upcoming content from us in the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. Just a bit of a teaser, but we got some more exciting stuff coming. So again, a huge thank you to everyone joining us in the Twitch chat live. Thank you to everyone watching this after the fact. And of course, thank you to the team for joining me today. But we will see you next month. So until then, take care.